Das Radikal.
This video was only made possible thanks to the extremely diligent work of one Bjarki Holmgeir Hall. Bjarki has done more research into unsolved human disappearances in Iceland than pretty much anybody, at least anybody that I'm aware of. Aside from working on a book on this matter, Bjarki has also made the first publicly available database that reaches down back to the year 1930, a database of people that have gone missing in Iceland without ever being found. Anyway, I just want to give a shout out to Bjarki, and I can't wait for your book. Take care. So, let's get on with it then. This is a video about 10 people who mysteriously vanished in Iceland and were never found. Bárður Jónsson was born in the year 1895 in Myrdalur. He was a farmer and a married father of 3. In early 1963 he retired and moved away from the countryside and to Kópavogur, eventually moving in with his younger sister. At the time, Kópavogur was a town of around 7,000 people and was still decades away from merging with Reykjavík as it has in our time. On the Monday afternoon of December 30th, 1963, Bárður went outside for a walk. He had recently injured his foot, giving him a slight limp. However, on this day the weather was quite nice. It was warm and there was relatively little snow for this time of year. Bárður eventually made his way to Nýbýlavegur 22, where some old friends of his were living at the time. However, apparently he only stopped by briefly and left his friends in good spirits at around 4:30 in the afternoon, by which time it was already dark outside. Around dinner time that evening, Bárður's family started to wonder why he had not yet returned home. So they called some of their friends and relatives, including their friends at Nýbýlavegur 22. Bárður's friends at Nýbýlavegur 22 were just as surprised as the family was when they realized that he had not yet returned home. The following day, rescue units started to search in the area around Kópavogur, hoping to find Bárður. Some friends of Bárður were living in Blesugróf in the east end of Reykjavík at the time, which is not very far from Nýbýlavegur 22. However, they had also not had any contact with him recently. However, the rescue units did focus much of their search in the area between Blesugróf and Nýbýlavegur, an area known as Fossvogur. However, none of the searchers could understand how such an old, frail man with a bad leg could simply vanish like that, seemingly into thin air. On New Year's Day there was a pretty bad storm, which halted most search efforts on that day. However, on the 2nd of January the search continued, this time with a lot more people joining in the search. Most of Kópavogur and large areas of Reykjavík were searched, as were all lakes, beaches and rivers in the area. Divers even dived into the harbor of Kópavogur, and a rescue helicopter was used for searching from the air, something which was a relatively new concept at the time. Despite all these efforts, not as much as a single footprint definitively belonging to Bárður was ever discovered. After several days the search was called off as it had started to snow. It was assumed that if Bárður had been outside somewhere during the storm on New Year's Day, he would have most likely perished, and it was hoped that once the snow melted during springtime that his body might turn up somewhere. However, spring came and eventually turned into summer, without his remains or any traces of him turning up anywhere. And Bárður Jónsson remains missing till this day. The Faroe Islands are an archipelago located midway between Scotland and Iceland, and is home to a roughly 50,000 people. And much like Iceland, the Faroe Islands have remained a part of the Kingdom of Denmark for centuries, and actually remains an autonomous country within the Danish realm till this very day. The southernmost island in the archipelago is called Suðurey, or South Island. It was there where a man named Willi Peterson grew up. Willi was described as a strongly built, hard-working yet quiet man. The Icelandic fishing industry was booming during the 1950s, and many Faroese men moved to Iceland to become seasonal fishermen or fish processing workers. And among them was a young man named Willi Peterson. Over the next 15 years or so, Willi would move regularly to Iceland to work in fish. He eventually even got himself an Icelandic girlfriend, and they even moved in with each other in an apartment at Hverfisgata in downtown Reykjavik. Now, I'm just speculating here, but I'm guessing that for a man born and raised in the Faroe Islands, where the largest town is Tórshavn, which at the time had a population of 10,000 people, Reykjavik must have seemed like a metropolis. Willi never made many friends in Iceland outside of his girlfriend's circle of friends, and since he never became a citizen, therefore remaining a citizen of Denmark and paying all his taxes to Denmark, there is actually very little known about Willi's life here in Iceland. In late August 1974, Willi received a visit from his uncle from the Faroe Islands. When his uncle arrived, he found out that Willi and his girlfriend were actually in the process of separating. And Willi told him that he soon had to move out of their apartment at Hverfisgata. Willi's uncle felt that Willi was taking the breakup pretty hard. His uncle, however, could only stay in Iceland for a limited amount of time, and shortly after he left Iceland, Willi moved out of the apartment in Hverfisgata, and we do not know where exactly he went from there. On September 4th, just a few days after Willi had moved out of the apartment, Willi's uncle back in the Faroe Islands received a phone call while he was at work. Much to his surprise, it was Willi calling him. It was somewhat unusual apparently for Willi to call his uncle while he was at work. Willi's uncle could hear on Willi's tone that something serious was going on. He asked his uncle if there was anything wrong, and Willi replied by saying that he needed to tell him something important. It was at that time that Willi's uncle, through the phone line, was able to hear loud, echoey voices, as if people yelling something had just entered the room where Willi was calling from. And then the phone line went dead. After Willi's relatives had been unable to regain contact with him, they eventually contacted the police of Reykjavik. However, the police of Reykjavik did not take the case of the missing Faroese man with much enthusiasm, and it appears that there was barely even an investigation into the matter. However, it needs to be noted that the police had very little to go on. Willi had no known address, and the location from where he had made the mysterious phone call was entirely unknown. There does exist an unconfirmed report that Willi may have been seen alive around 6 days after the mysterious phone call. However, this remains unproven. The exact fate of Willi Peterson remain a mystery till this day. Friday, June 16th, 1978 in Dalvík in North Iceland was, by most accounts, a beautiful warm summer day. Most of the town's residents, both young and old, stayed up late and enjoyed themselves in the warm midnight sun, looking forward to the Independence Day celebrations the next day. It was shortly after midnight when 4 local teenage boys walked down into the harbor and entered an 11-foot plastic rowboat which had been fitted with an outboard engine. The 4 boys were Símon Hilmarsson and Stefán Ægisson, both 18 years old. Símon's classmates Gunnar Jónsson, who was 17, and their friend Egill Antonsson, who was 16 years old. The 4 teens had borrowed the boat from somebody they knew earlier that day. However, they had not told anyone of their plans to leave the harbor this late at night. As the 4 teens were exiting the harbor of Dalvík, the one police officer who was on duty that evening in the town spotted them and decided to keep an eye out for them with his binoculars. The weather that night, as mentioned before, was incredibly calm. Witnesses claim that there was barely a single wave in sight anywhere, and this was at the height of the midnight sun, and visibility was excellent. The police officer continued to monitor the boys through his binoculars as they sailed towards Hrísey. Hrísey is an island in the center of Eyjafjörður, which has a population of around 200. As he could see the boys entering the harbor of Hrísey, the shadow of the island itself made it harder for him to be able to see them clearly. However, he figured that they had made it safely towards the island and stopped watching them. On the 17th, the parents of Símon, Gunnar, Stefán and Egill started to ask around whether or not anybody had seen their boys. Word of this eventually reached the policeman, which had watched over them the previous night, so he and other officers sailed over to Hrísey in order to look for them. However, as they arrived to the harbor of Hrísey, they were surprised to see that the boys' small white plastic boat was not docked anywhere in the harbor. And stranger still, not a single resident of Hrísey claimed to have seen or met the boys the previous evening. Over the next few days, a massive search and rescue operation was launched all over Eyjafjörður. Both sides of the fjord and also the island of Hrísey itself was thoroughly searched. The searchers eventually found one oar, believing to have come off the boat on the shore just a few hundred meters from the harbor at Hrísey, and eventually they also found a jacket and a shoe belonging to one of the boys near Ystibær on the northern end of Hrísey. However, the boat itself and the 4 teens were never seen again. The exact reason of why the boys went to Hrísey in the first place remains unknown. It is also not known whether or not they even made it to the island in the first place, since nobody living there claims to have seen them. Were they perhaps on their way back when the boat suddenly sank? Or did they perhaps sail somewhere else entirely? And also, how could the boat have vanished like this completely into thin air, as it seems, during such optimal weather conditions? We will most likely never know the truth. Guðmundur Finnur Björnsson was a 20-year-old mechanic student who came from a large family in South Múlasýsla in East Iceland. He moved to Reykjavík in order to attend school, and eventually moved in with his sister who lived there. He loved all things technical and often spent a lot of time hanging out outside the Reykjavik airport because he liked to look at various types of airplanes. Guðmundur turns 20 years old on the Thursday of November 19th, 1987, and the following Saturday he decided to celebrate with some of his friends in his apartment in downtown Reykjavik. Around midnight, he and his brother Ragnar and Ragnar's friend decided that they would go together to a club called Hollywood, which was the most popular club in all of Reykjavik during much of the 1980s. The three young men took a taxi to Ármúli, where Hollywood was located, and Ragnar and his friend immediately exited the taxi in order to get into the waiting line outside the club, while Guðmundur stayed behind for a bit since he had to pay the fare. Once the birthday boy made it to the waiting line, several more people had entered the line behind Ragnar and Ragnar's friend. Guðmundur first attempted to cut in the line to stay with his brother. However, when some of the ladies further back in the line protested this, Guðmundur decided to humbly go to the back of the waiting line, and he and his brother agreed that they would meet once they were all inside. Guðmundur then seemingly went to the back of the line. The line eventually moved forwards, and pretty soon Ragnar and his friends had gained admittance into the club. They, however, would never see Guðmundur again. Upon the realization that Guðmundur was missing and that nobody knew where he was, Guðmundur's family, of course, decided to notify the police. Now, in this video, as well as the previous video, I mentioned how the police in Iceland had often not treated missing person cases with a lot of respect and seriousness, and that there's a good chance that some cases may have gone unsolved even with the evidence present, simply because the police didn't press the matter hard enough. However, in the case of Guðmundur Björnsson, this appears to not have been the case, as the case was investigated quite thoroughly by both the Reykjavik police and the National Investigation Police, or Rannsóknarlögregla ríkisins. As the investigation into the disappearance of Guðmundur went forth, a witness soon stepped forward. The witness was a fireman who worked at Reykjavik City Airport. According to him, a young man whose description matched Guðmundur almost perfectly wandered onto one of the runways of the airport at around 2:10 a.m. The fireman then drove Guðmundur to the airport's parking lot, where Guðmundur said goodbye to him and wandered off into the night. The fireman noted that the weather was quite good, and also Guðmundur was well dressed enough to be able to handle the cold, as well as being not so drunk that he most likely would be able to get home on his own. This witness report completely changed the whole focus of the investigation. The following day, a large group of rescue workers thoroughly searched the surroundings of Öskjuhlíð, which is a wooded hill in the center of Reykjavik, where Perlan is located today. The rescue workers also searched all nearby beaches. However, all of this eventually yielded no results, and Guðmundur did not turn up anywhere. It needs to also be noted that at this point in history, Öskjuhlíð was a popular hangout spot for many of society's most unwanted outcasts, that being homeless people and drug addicts. The police investigated the possibility that Guðmundur might have had an unfortunate encounter that may have led to him having been made to disappear. However, looking into this possibility also yielded no results. There has also never been an explanation found that could shed light on why exactly he would suddenly decide to leave the club during his own birthday celebrations. Guðmundur Finnur Björnsson remains missing till this day. Julius Karlsson and Óskar Halldórsson had been best friends ever since they were small children. They both lived with their parents on the same street in Keflavik. They were very musical and wanted to one day create their own band. January 26, 1994 was a Wednesday. It was a very cold and windy day. When Óskar came home from school, he only stayed over a brief while before telling his parents that he was going over to Julius and hang out with him. When Óskar met Julius, Julius immediately got dressed and then the two boys headed out together. Julius and Óskar walked together into the town center of Keflavik. They went over to a street named Víkurbraut, which is close to the harbor of Keflavik, where they stopped by at a local store before heading out again. Around dinner time that evening, the parents of Óskar and Julius started to call some of their friends and family, asking if anybody knew where the boys were located. It was not uncommon for them to stay out long and losing track of time. However, much to the surprise of the parents and eventually much to their horror, none of the people they called had any idea where Julius and Óskar were located. Shortly before midnight, the dismayed parents of Óskar and Julius contacted the local police, and early the next morning a very large group of rescue workers started their search. It was initially feared that Óskar and Julius might have fallen into the ocean from one of the many dangerous ocean cliffs that dot the coastline around Keflavik. The searchers used dogs in order to try and track the movements of Óskar and Julius. The dogs continuously followed the same trail from the store at Víkurbraut and down to a set of high ocean cliffs located at the edge of town. That is where the trail ended every time, without any signs of Óskar or Julius anywhere. Helicopters and boats were used to try to scan the coastline for any sign of them. However, divers were unable to dive around the ocean cliffs where the trail ended due to bad weather, as it was considered too dangerous to dive at that time. Even though the trail that the dogs trailed always ended on the same place, the police also considered the possibility that the dogs may have been tracking an older trail left by them, or that perhaps they had simply walked back the same way that they came. Every possibility was considered, and the police pleaded to the public in order to receive any information that could lead them and to the boys so they might hopefully be brought home safely. The police received a great deal of leads and information, and all were investigated. One potential witness claimed that they saw the boys removing money from an ATM machine at Lækjartorg in Reykjavík. Another potential witness believed that he saw the boys running down Austurstræti, which is nearby, and that somebody may have been chasing after them. Another lead placed the boys near Stokkseyri in southern Iceland, and there were also several unconfirmed sightings of them all over Keflavik on the night that they disappeared. Overall, one must say that the police of Keflavik really did pursue any potential lead that somebody fed to them. The police even ordered that an entire container ship that had recently left the harbor of Keflavik be returned so that the entire ship and its cargo could be searched, as one of the leads placed the boys in the harbor right around the time the ship was leaving. However, this also yielded no results. Óskar and Julius were never found. There are till this day a lot of rumors and urban legends surrounding their disappearance. I myself remember hearing that several kids in Keflavik were thoroughly convinced that a local fisherman that had once been convicted of child molestation had abducted them. I myself also remember hearing when I was a kid about two children from Keflavik wandering onto a container ship and getting locked in a container for some reason and being shipped out to God knows where. But as I said, most of it is probably just rumors. Well, obviously all of it has to be rumors and urban legends because there can only be one truth. Now, the most common down-to-earth theory is of course that they simply slipped on ice, fell into the ocean, died, and their bodies were drifted out to sea. Well, I hope you liked the video. I may make another video like this, but I'm not sure. A lot of work goes into these. But yeah, if you want to hear about something else, another dark topic related to Iceland or something else, you can make suggestions in the comments. Anyway, have a nice day, like and subscribe and all of that, and I'll see you in the next video.
Das Radikal.